Jellybean, real name Gary George Johnson, died suddenly Friday night, his family tells TMZ. The cause of death is currently unknown, aside from being the one and only drummer in The Time, which later changed its name to Morris Day and The Time and the original Seven Vin. The late musician is known for being a leading innovator in what became known as the Minneapolis sound of funk, rock and soul movement in the 1970s and 80s. Jellybean was also a member of the Prince-formed group The Family, and vocalist Susanna Melvoin paid tribute to her brother on Instagram. Following his unexpected death, she remembered him as a prolific guitarist, noting, "Oxygen for him was the inhale and exhale of playing his guitar," adding to his accomplishments. He also played a fictionalized version of himself in the 1984 Purple Rain movie and helped produce Janet Jackson's 1990 one-hit single Black Cat, his family tells TMZ. Jellybean loved his family, his friends, and the city of Minneapolis. He is the founder, along with his long-term partner of more than 20 years, Marty Bragg, and her daughter, of the Minneapolis Sound Museum, meant to preserve the history and legacy of the Minneapolis Sound. Fans can learn more and donate on the museum's website. Jellybean had just celebrated his 69th this week, RIP. The news of Jellybean Johnson's sudden passing spread like a shockwave through the music world, rippling across generations and communities that had been shaped, knowingly or unknowingly, by the sound he helped build. For many, Jellybean wasn't just a musician or a drummer or a producer. He was a living embodiment of a musical era defined by innovation, rebellion, creativity, and the refusal to fit neatly into any category. His loss does not simply mark the end of a life, but the end of a particular energy, a warmth, a groove, and a pulse that felt uniquely his. For decades, Jellybean had been a central force in what the world came to call the Minneapolis Sound, a fusion of funk, rock, pop, soul, and electronic experimentation that didn't just break rules but rewrote them entirely. To understand why his death feels so deeply personal to so many people, even those who may not have known him by name, is to understand what he contributed to the cultural DNA of modern music. The Minneapolis Sound wasn't just a style or a genre. It was a spirit, a revolution, and for many, a home. And Jellybean, with his unmistakable rhythmic instinct and fearless creativity, was one of its architects. He stood beside Prince during the rise of a movement that would inspire musicians across the globe, shaping sounds that still echo in today's music charts, in today's concert stages, and in today's attempts to blend genres the way he and his peers had done decades earlier. But beyond the music, beyond the iconic drumming and unforgettable guitar riffs, beyond the wild stage performances and the timeless songs that captured entire eras, there was the man, Gary George Johnson, a man who cared deeply for his family, a man who loved Minneapolis not just as a place on a map but as a living, breathing community of artists, dreamers, and everyday people. A man who poured his energy into preserving the very history he helped create, ensuring that future generations would know not just the sound, but the stories. Those who knew him personally often describe him not in terms of fame or success but in terms of passion and unrestrained, almost childlike passion for music. Jellybean was the kind of person who could pick up an instrument and make it feel alive. Whether behind a drum kit or holding a guitar, he played with a fire that came from somewhere deep inside, as if music wasn't something he performed but something he breathed. Susanna Melvoin's tribute, saying that playing guitar was his inhale and exhale, wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was literal truth. Music wasn't something Jellybean did. It was who he was. The suddenness of his death only deepens the grief. To his fans, his peers, his family, and those in Minneapolis who considered him part of their cultural identity, the news felt like losing a living monument, a walking encyclopedia of memories, stories, and experiences that could never be replicated. Jellybean had just celebrated his 69th birthday. There was no warning, no public sign that anything was wrong. It was a reminder, cruel, jarring, cold, of how fragile life is, even for those who feel larger than life. Yet in remembering Jellybean, we also remember the remarkable life he lived. His journey began long before fame, long before Prince, long before The Time. Born on November 12, 1955, in Chicago, Jellybean grew up in a world where music wasn't just entertainment, it was survival, expression, escape, identity. He was drawn to rhythm from an early age, banging on surfaces, experimenting with sounds, feeling melodies in the everyday noise around him. By the time he was a teenager, it was clear that music was going to be his entire world. His path to Minneapolis, the city that would shape him as much as he shaped it, was not a carefully planned choice but a destiny unfolding. When he arrived there in the late 1970s, Minneapolis wasn't yet the global music hotspot it would eventually become. It was a city filled with raw talent, untapped potential, and a hunger for something new. It was also a place where Prince Rogers Nelson, a young musical prodigy, was beginning to change everything. Prince had an uncanny ability not just to create music but to sense talent, to find people who could bring his musical visions to life in ways no one else could. It didn't take long for him to notice Jellybean Johnson. When Jellybean joined Prince's band, then known simply as The Time, he stepped directly into a movement that would soon explode. The Time was more than a band. It was a phenomenon. Their combination of funk, soul, attitude, rhythm, theatrics, and tight musicianship made them an unstoppable force on stage. Jellybean, as the drummer, was the heartbeat. He provided the backbone, the structure, the personality, and the drive that made The Time's performances feel electric and alive. His drumming wasn't mechanical or restrained. It was full of swagger, style, and confidence. He didn't just play the beat, he made the beat play the crowd. Even as Prince's own fame skyrocketed, The Time became icons in their own right. Their energy, their chemistry, and their tight musical execution made them legends, especially among Black audiences who saw the band as a reflection of their own humor, their own style, their own swagger. Songs like Jungle Love and The Bird became cultural staples. And at the center of that infectious energy behind the drum kit was Jellybean, steady, powerful, charismatic, and unforgettable, but he was never only a drummer. Jellybean's musical talents extended far beyond that single role. Prince recognized it early, often pushing him to experiment with guitar, production, and arrangement. Many fans don't realize that Jellybean's guitar playing was as distinct and electrifying as his drumming. He had a style that blended precision with raw emotion, technique with instinct. It's no wonder Susanna Melvoin described him the way she did. To Jellybean, the guitar was not an instrument, it was an extension of his soul. His work in The Family, yet another Prince-formed project, expanded his artistry even further. And as the 1980s transitioned into the 1990s, Jellybean continued to evolve, taking on production roles that demonstrated his deep understanding of how to construct music that would resonate not just for the moment, but for decades. When he helped produce Janet Jackson's Black Cat, he showed the world that his talent wasn't confined to funk rhythms or Minneapolis grooves. Black Cat, a raw-confused anthem, became a massive note one hit, blending Janet's bold vocals with a gritty, guitar-driven sound that Jellybean helped craft. His fingerprints were on a song that defined a moment in pop culture, proving his versatility and brilliance. His appearance in Purple Rain may have been a fictionalized version of himself, but it immortalized him in one of the most iconic music films of all time. The movie wasn't just entertainment. It was a statement, a cultural shift, a visual and sonic revolution, and Jellybean was part of that history. For the Minneapolis community, his legacy extended far beyond performance. Jellybean dedicated the later years of his life to preserving the history of the Minneapolis sound through the Minneapolis Sound Museum, which he co-founded with his longtime partner Marty Bragg and her daughter. The museum wasn't just a collection of artifacts. It was a living tribute to a cultural movement that defined generations. It was Jellybean's way of ensuring that the world understood the depth, the artistry, and the human stories behind the music. For him, the Minneapolis sound was not just Prince, not just The Time, not just the hits, it was a family of artists, collaborators, rivals, dreamers, and believers.